Welcome to the On Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Anurag Goel. Dude, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here. I'm excited.
Hey, give everybody, we've never met, so people know who listen to the show. Sometimes I have people on that I've met, sometimes I don't. We've never met. So give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today.
Absolutely. I am the founder and CEO at Render, which is a modern cloud provider. And the problem we're solving is that the large clouds, the hyperscalers, have become increasingly complex for most companies, most businesses to use. And we see teams of DevOps engineers or platform engineers or sysadmins or whatever you want to call them at every company trying to make sense of this complexity of the hyperscalers. And I'm sure you understand this as I can see you nodding. Um, this is not a an inevitable state of the world. It is something that can be fixed by introducing the right level of flexibility managed with the right level of abstraction and automating a lot of the bits that these teams are doing within companies. And so that's essentially what Render is. It is a cloud platform that automates most of what DevOps teams within companies do and allows teams to grow quickly from founding to unicorn plus with very small engineering teams who can focus entirely on their products and leave the rest to Render's automated cloud solution.
How long has Render been around?
We started in 2018, and we now have over 2 million developers on the platform. And we just announced an 80 million Series C, which brings our total funding to about $157 million since we started.
Man, if you had come to me in 2018 and said, Bill, I want you to invest in this. We're going to compete against Fang. I would have said, all right, what kind of drugs are you on? And why are you not sharing them with me? Like what you've decided to do in 2018 feels like monumental. Like I would just love to hear your sort of thoughts on, I'm going to call it the audacity that you can compete against Google, Amazon, and sort of Microsoft here.
Yeah, I think it's in some ways still very early days. And in that sense, 2018 is not that long ago compared to where we are in January 2025. And I think this will become clearer with some background prior to 2018. So I was the eighth employee at Stripe, the fifth engineer over there. And I helped this company, which was, four people at the time when I first interviewed with them, launch. And then we grew the company to over $5 billion in valuation and 400 plus people by the time I left in 2016. But even when I joined, of the five engineers, like one person was dedicated to managing AWS. And existing platforms like Heroku just weren't scalable for us, even back in, I'm talking about 2011. And as the company grew, as the engineering team grew, at a like 20% number continued to stay the same. And the infrastructure team was very much focused on managing VMs and managing all the APIs that AWS might give you to interact with the 500, well, 300 plus services, not 500, but we're close, that they have that you need to glue together and that you need to monitor and configure. And these are all things that just took a lot of engineering bandwidth away from what Stripe, obviously Stripe is incredibly, hugely successful. But early on, I think it took a lot of time away from building the right kind of products faster. And we had to grow the team beyond what we actually needed. And that was pretty much a realization for me that there was something wrong here, because when I talked to everyone on our team, we weren't spending time on doing innovative things in infrastructure. We were simply gluing things together, and there was just a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting, as it's often called. And so then after I left Stripe, I decided that I needed to solve a large and ambitious problem that I enjoyed solving given my skills and talent. And I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of companies, understanding a lot of different spaces, building a lot of my own applications. And throughout, the common thread was it's still incredibly hard to get an application online. And it was even harder to keep it scaled, to keep it reliable, to make it secure as your company grew, as your team grew, as your usage grew, and as your application architecture became more complex. And it wasn't, knowing what I knew, it wasn't clear to me that you couldn't actually try to solve this problem in the day of all the advances that we had seen in container technology and in container orchestration technology like Kubernetes, in new advances in the cloud that were fundamental to Render's original architecture. And that's what prompted me to start the company. And it was as crazy a bet back then as it is today, but now we've proven it out with real numbers, with real users, developers, and real revenue, that both of which are growing very quickly.
That's awesome. So, a couple things. One, Kevin, the producer, and I spent last week leveraging the Stripe APIs to do a checkout, and I was impressed, man. The I think we got that all working in like a day. It was I had never tried to use the Stripe APIs before, and the integrations between me and my service, and dude, it was badass. Like I was like sold. I get it now, right? At Ardan, we try to build for internal stuff. I try to build a single service, right? We containerize it, and we've been using Cloud Build and Cloud Run, which has been fantastic for us because that's easy to build and deploy, and I don't have to pay unless somebody's hitting it. The moment I think we've got any form of microservices, then me and my clients were using sort of Kubernetes. So I jumped on your homepage there, and I saw you have a lot of the same. It almost felt like Cloud Run a little bit, except I can even just say bring up a web server for a static site or cron jobs. And so I would just love, before we get into your journey, I would love to hear your thoughts on like the Cloud Run sort of things that Google are providing to solve some of the same problems that you're talking about, and then how maybe you differentiate. Why should Arden Labs get off of Google and start maybe deploying stuff on Render? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think you answered it yourself, because you said that if I just want to spin up a simple container, I run it on Cloud Run, and this is sort of, I think, a one-off service that doesn't get a lot of traffic, and it goes to sleep and it's not constantly running. I think Cloud Run may be suitable for that. And it's not just Cloud Run. There are other places in the world that are suitable for running a one-off container, going to sleep if you don't have activity. The bigger issue is when you want to start thinking about more complex architectures, which become inevitable as your application scales. And you said you reach for Kubernetes in those situations. You don't need to, is Render's claim.
Okay.
And that's what we're saying. So why do you niche for Kubernetes? So when you think about things that you get out of Kubernetes, you get private networking, you get service discovery, you get certificate management, you get auto healing, auto scaling. Guess what? You can get all of those things with Render without knowing a line of Kubernetes, without writing a single line of YAML. And it's all very easy to do using our dashboard, using our CLI. We have our own really high level infrastructure as code format, and that is YAML, but you can probably convert about, I would say, 5,000 lines of YAML to about 10 lines of render
Wow.
infrastructure as code, because we operate not at the VM level, or at the bare bones infrastructure level. We operate at the application level, but we still make it easy for you to build complex architectures. And that's what we're seeing with customers who started out on us, like I was saying earlier, with just the three founders or the two founders. And we just started talking about when these customers bridge, who were actually, it's a small word. They grew entirely on render and were acquired by Stripe last year for $1.1 billion. And they're still running all of their infrastructure on render. And they were able to scale to that level of usage and be the primary stablecoin provider in the world while running all their infrastructure on render.
Are you
So
are you are you are you backed by one of the clouds for compute?
no, we're not. Oh, you mean like not from an investment sense, but from like where we're running things?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we are currently running on both GCP and AWS. And the way we build our architecture is agnostic to the individual cloud provider ourselves. So we build our own Postgres, managed Postgres service. And it's enterprise grade. You get high availability, you get point in time recovery, you get read replicas. There's a lot of good stuff in our Postgres offering, but we built it so that we can run it in the exact same way on GCP versus AWS versus eventually our own metal. And we're using GCP and AWS right now because it's the fastest way for us to build higher level functionality that our customers need. But with the new funding, you can imagine that we'll start looking elsewhere in addition to these providers.
Last question here, and then I'm going to jump, and then we're going to come back. Um, from a pricing perspective, since you're running an Amazon and GCP, can I say, hey, here's my account, so I don't want you charging me for compute. I'll just pay for your extended services. Like, do you have that sort of pricing models?
We don't, and that's a very conscious decision because when we think about our vision for the future, we're really thinking about an all-in-one cloud that then can integrate with specialized services on AWS or GCP. And the reason we don't currently have this model of like running in your own infrastructure is because we lose a level of control that allows us to offer a great end-to-end experience to you. So in some ways, it's similar to Apple not allowing iOS to run on any other hardware. Whereas Google with Android, you can run it on any phone you want. So I think it's that level of control that allows us to give the developer experience and the capabilities that I think will be harder for us to get to if we ran entirely on someone else's infrastructure or someone else's AWS account. Having said that, it's also a question of prioritization. This is a very long-term generational company. Never say never. But right now we're focused on a full stack cloud that doesn't make you get an AWS account.
So anytime I've suggested that sort of model, the first thing that's thrown at me is, well, a bunch of these companies, they get free credits by Google and apps because they want them, right? And now you can't use the free credits because, right, I'm using your account technically, not, yeah.
Yeah,
That's the argument that's always thrown at me.
and I think it's a valid argument when you're starting out. Um, However, my counter argument to that is when something goes wrong, who do you call? Do you call AWS support? Do you call render support? Like just having one company that was responsible for the whole thing gives you a level of confidence that you would not have otherwise. Think about, let's say someone comes to you and says, I want your application to have um, HIPAA compliance or SOC 2 ISO compliance. Now, they might say, "Oh, I actually want access to your AWS account because that's how the providers that give you HIPAA SOC 2 compliance might say, I want access to your AWS account because that's how we verify your installation." But then how now do they interact with you or do they interact with the third-party provider that's spinning up infrastructure in your AWS account? So I think fundamentally having a single, in many ways, throat to choke just makes your life much easier, especially when things go wrong. And we pride ourselves on our customer support. And when things go wrong, we don't tell you to fiddle a knob in AWS. We go fix things for you.
So I imagine, because I don't see it on the website yet, that you must be starting to focus on LLM support, where I could get a large language model of my choice off a Hugging Face on an NVIDIA to any other sort of card I can afford. Are you working towards that now too?
It is something that we constantly think about. But for us, it's also really important to focus on what some of our growing customers need that is unique to what we can build versus what they might be able to get from somewhere else. And when we think about that, and we survey our users regularly about, hey, should we do GPUs or should we do something else? And we're still a small company that we have to make the right bets. What we're hearing is not that GPUs is the primary thing they need. What we're hearing is they need us to build object storage because that is the one missing component of the entire stack that is still forcing them to have build out an AWS account, and they don't like fiddling with S3 knobs. And S3 is like insecure by default. You have to go figure out IAM policies and security groups and all of that to make sure that you don't accidentally leak your objects. And there's other issues with S3, but it's a great API. But they just want render to be fully integrated and vertically integrated. And so should we build GPUs versus object storage? I don't think it's an either or, but that's where we're focused. We want to continue to give people what they need for their application development that we still don't have in the platform. And object storage is probably the last bit. Now, will we do GPUs this year or next year? Unclear. It is something that we're looking into.
I imagine you've heard of Minio, which has been around. Yeah, right. Like, so the moment you say I want private S3 API object storage, like my brain goes, boom. Like install that thing, man. You got everything you need right there. Which it seems like I could install that in your environment too.
You can install Minio on render today because one of the big things that we do that legacy providers like Heroku don't is actually give you disk volumes. You can actually very easily create a volume and attach it to a disk by simply saying, this is the path that I want to attach it on, and this is the size, and that's it. And you can increase the size later or whatever. Doing that on AWS, you can imagine all the things that you need to do to make that happen. And then with render, it's just available to your application. Your application can start writing on a path right away, and it's persisted across deploys. And so with stuff like that, you can do a lot that you aren't able to do on things like Roku. You can run your own Elasticsearch. People run their own Mongo. They run their own MinIO. Mini or MinIO, I think it depends.
Yeah, I always called it
Yeah,
Minio, but yeah.
I think the founders call it MinIO, so that's probably the right, well, what they would think is the right way to do it. But I think the fundamental thing is you get the flexibility to build some of these things yourself. At the same time, our customers don't want to manage object stores themselves. They just want a fully managed solution. And so we cater to companies that really don't want to have to deal with infrastructure. They want everything fully managed. They want it in one place, and they want, like I was saying earlier, one contact, one support number or one support Slack channel. So if anything goes wrong or if they need support in the middle of the night, they know who to call.
Yeah, I'm gonna share this. I hate ops, by the way, and I hate ops. Hate it. Hate. I'm a software developer. I don't mind doing a little of the CI. I don't mind but God, I hate ops, man. This sounds like this. What you're describing sounds really great. I'm gonna send it to my ops. I actually just sent it while we were talking. So check this out. I want to see if we can how we can leverage that.
Yeah, we have people moving over to us from Kubernetes very regularly.
No, it's super interesting. So for sure, even after we're done, I'm gonna be looking at this. Okay, we're gonna jump in the time machine, and we'll get back to this sort of near the end. But I want to hear a bit of your journey on sort of how you got here. So before we start, a couple of questions. So where were you living when you finished high school, or the equivalent of high school? And what year was that?
Yeah, so I grew up in New Delhi in India, and I went to high school there, and then I also went to college there.
Oh, don't give me college yet. Don't give me college yet. All
Okay,
right,
okay, okay,
move to it. Let's just
okay.
stay at the high. So what year
Yeah.
was it when you were like
Um,
graduating? Like you're 17, 18 year old at that time.
yeah, there was the late 90s, very, very late 90s. We were coming
Okay.
up on the 2000s, and then maybe I can now go into the college years.
No, you can't go into
No, not
college years
yet.
yet. I got
Okay,
no.
okay, okay. We
I'm
gotta
gonna I'm
wait.
gonna
Okay.
interrupt you a lot. Yeah, we gotta wait. We
Yes.
gotta wait
Yeah.
because I'm trying to set a stage of what computing looked like when
Oh,
you
I
were
see.
sort of 17, 18. So he's talking late 90s. It's just we'll agree to 98, which is fine. And it gives everybody a general sense, right? So the internet has been publicly available now for about 4 or 5 years, right? We're still running DOS machines or so. Just get a general idea. Okay, now I want you to clear your mind. Don't think too hard on this question here. I want the first thought that pops in your head of remembering doing something on the computer. First thought.
I was programming in GW Basic in on a Tandy. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But that was like
Everybody.
in like early middle school.
Yeah. You had that at home or you had it at
No,
school?
it was at in school. I did not have a computer at home until actually I bought my first computer in college.
Okay.
I came from a standard like in India like a middle of the road middle class family, and buying a computer was not at the top of our list.
But you had the school you were going to had the computer, so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
they
cool.
had like five computers for middle schoolers, and we it was basically a DOS terminal, and I remember writing my first GW Basic programs, and now that's making me think about Pascal as well, and
Yeah, but not in junior high school. Not like you're not doing Pascal and maybe in high
no, I
school.
don't think so. I don't, I'm not sure I remember exactly when. But yeah, but we didn't even have the internet in
No,
junior
definitely.
high. And then I got my first email address. All of that happened in college.
So then in high school, you weren't really doing anything with computers during those years.
I was part of um, the computer science track, and I was doing programming assignments, but I didn't actually have the time in high school to focus on writing code for fun because India has this insane education system where if you want to go to college at the best school in the country, then you spend most of your high school preparing for this exam that you take to compete with 100,000, 200,000 other people in the country. You get, if depending on where you end up, what your scores are, you get to choose which school you go to. And so that's what I was doing in high school. I was preparing for
Yeah,
that exam.
I, I've 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 had a few people on the show that grew up in India like this. So how did you end up on that test, man? Were you in the
I was in the top 100, and so I
nice?
managed to go to
Wow.
the school of my choice and study computer science, which was actually really important to me, and it turned out great.
And that school was in New Delhi too.
Yeah, so that was IIT New Delhi. Um,
Okay, we're gonna get into that real quick. But what else were you doing in high school? I mean, were you into sports, music, like anything else? It couldn't have just been heads down. I got to
I,
be in the top 100.
I that was my goal, and I focused on it at the expense of everything else. There were three things that I was doing. I was eating, sleeping, and preparing for that exam.
Okay, did you have pressure on you to score? I want to know if this was something that you internalized early on and that effort came from within you and nobody was sort of pushing you, or did you feel like you had to do? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of.
Oh, it was very clearly something that
Uh,
I wanted to do. Um, my mom would have been fine either way. She actually wanted me to become a doctor, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Um, and so I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do to get there. So it was very internal. Yeah,
do you have any siblings?
I don't.
You don't.
And
Okay. Where do you
yeah, so
think that
I'm
came from? Where do you think it came from? This need. I'm going to call it a need because it wasn't a want.
yeah,
This need to
yeah.
score as high on that list as possible.
I mean, I think we need to have a separate therapy session about this.
No, that's fair. Everybody's different, right? Some people are too immature, like I was during that time, to even consider like how important that would be for my future. Like people are at different maturity. I'm going to use maturity levels. So I feel like you were at a high maturity level even at a young age.
I wish I was more mature looking back. There were certainly things that I look back and wince at. But this was one part where I do think I made the right call. And yeah, it's hard for me to point to like one thing that made me decide that this is what I want to do. But I think I'd been ambitious from a very early age. And that's where we have to sort of dig into why. But that was the state of things, and this
Was
was
your
the
did
scene.
your high
Yeah,
school drive that too? Because I have I have 7 kids that I manage. 2 of them, one is in high school, one is in junior high, and the high school that they go to drives this idea of going to university and going to the top university in the country. And yes, they have to pass state exams and they have to do that, but it's sort of driven into their heads all the time that you have to be focused. Blah blah blah. I'm wondering if your high school is similar.
yeah. So it's interesting because uh, the school I went to until and through 10th grade was different from the school I attended for 11th and 12th grade. And I actually switched because I wanted to go to a school where more people were interested in doing what I wanted to do. Um,
That's fair.
and I was part of like the people I hung out with, the people in my class in high school. I think we had maybe five or so people, maybe not five, but around that number from a class of about 60 people who all ended up in the top 100 um,
Nice.
that year.
Wow.
And so I wanted to create an environment for myself where I could hang out with other people who wanted the same thing. So we would sort of all focus on the same things, which is why I switched.
So when you chose the university, which what was it called again? I've heard the name of
IIT,
it.
the Indian
The
Institute of
IIIT.
Technology. Yeah.
Like when you walk in there and you're saying I'm 100, everybody's laughing because they're like, "What do you mean 100?" I'm like 5, right? I mean, like many of those kids in the top 100 are in that school, right?
Yeah, they're all smart.
So even though like you're intimidating to 200 other thousand people, do you kind of go in there also feeling intimidated because you're
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
I felt I certainly was impressed by the people who were like in the top seven, five. One of my closest friends in high school was who I used to sit with in class was number 17.
wow,
And another person I used to know was like number 9 or something like that. And so
wow, top
like
10,
these were
yeah.
yeah, so these were people I kind of knew. And so it wasn't like, we were coming in and like, oh my God, this person. So I had built that. And even when I was studying for this exam, I knew that these people were going to do better than me, because they were doing better than me. Uh, but it was still really interesting to be in this class of um, overachievers who had all been training for this and were all pretty ambitious. The interesting thing, though, is that a lot of people switched their emphasis on doing well when they got into college. And Yeah. So other things and enjoying life suddenly became more important, which you can imagine is natural if you spent like the best part of your life, the best years of your life in high
I
school,
mean,
just
you're burnt out, right? You're
you burned
burnt
out.
out,
You're
but you
completely
got
burned out.
there, and now there's no. I guess you got to maintain a GPA at some level, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you
but in the
need to
first
cut loose,
year,
right?
like who cares? You know? So as
So
a
was that you? Did you
freshman,
like that
that
first year? Did you
yeah,
like
and I was
decompress?
in a frat in as a freshman, and I had a ton of fun, and my GPA was terrible, and no regrets.
I know because so I was like that in uni too, and we were dumb, young. It's ignorance is bliss, right? We would like
Yeah,
just say you had to pass because your GPA is not on your diploma. That was like our mantra, right? Like the GPA is not on the diploma.
so that's not true for the college I went to, and so in my third semester as a sophomore in my third semester in college, I was like, okay, I've had enough fun. I need to get back to academics. So I switched things a little bit. And I think a lot of people in college were very surprised by my abrupt change in focus and then the ensuing abrupt change in my GPA trajectory. But I think it ended up being the right thing for me to do because then I was one of the few people who were hired into a tech company in the US right out of college. And I think there was like four or five people in the entire year that graduated. And I was tired of studying computer science. I really just wanted to go build things and work and make money
And that
and
was a
so
4 year program though, right?
that was a 4 year program.
And
Yeah.
you weren't living at home for those 4 years either, right? You were off
Well, for the
campus. I
first,
mean, on campus.
so so after I decided that I needed to get back on track, I decided to move back home so I could focus on.
That had to be hard, dude. It's hard when you leave the house and you have the freedom. Because I don't care how much freedom your parents give you, it's still their home.
No, you're right. And again, similar to how I switched high schools, it was important to me that I focus on my GPA and to create the environment around me so I could focus on my GPA. And I knew that if I'd continued to live in the frat, I would just continue to have fun and hang out until like 3 a.m., just, chatting with other people.
And your
S-
parents didn't have this conversation with you. This was a
yeah, my mom, like, she was like, whatever. It's like, he
wow.
got into IIT, it's the best thing in the world. It's fine. Like, I don't care about him anymore. He'll be fine.
So talk about this job out of uni then that only like 5 people got to go. Like what's
Yeah, so
is that just come up and they're like apply and then talk a little bit
so
about that.
they so this was a startup based in Boston, and they were tiny. They were about as big as Render is now, and I think they were just looking for cheap labor. I think they wanted to
But you would have had to
hire.
be an H-1B, right? Like they would have had
Yes,
to agree to hire, which
yeah,
costs money. It's not
yeah, it
free.
does. But I think they wanted. I'm not sure why they chose to hire people out of this college in India. I knew, so they clearly, like, all these people in the top university in India, in the best computer science program in the country of like 1 billion people, they've got to be smart. So they decided that they would go hire these people and they could hire them for maybe less money than they would pay like an MIT grad because someone at MIT has certain expectations around what they want to get paid out of college. Whereas coming from India, we were like $50,000, sure. And
It's a lot of money anyway, really.
yeah, so especially coming out of college, right? You're like, oh my God, if like ten thousand
Yeah,
dollars a year is
early
a lot of money.
2000.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we
So wait, but
so
they weren't the founders weren't from India.
no, but the
No, okay.
CTO was, and
Oh,
so
okay.
he flew out to our campus. And he actually, so this is why, if it in hindsight, it was important for me to focus on my GPA because he created a cutoff of like 8.5 out of 10 um, before he even spoke to anyone. And my first year GPA was like in the sixes out of 10, but then I ended with like a straight like 10 on 10. And so my average ended up being a little bit over 8.5. So I just got through, but then I did well in the
Uh,
interview, so I managed to make it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So they offer you the job. You're newly graduated. Mom, I'm going to the States. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I'm not making enough money to live on my own. So I'm going to live with people. Like, talk about having to find a flat and sort of getting set up. It's the first time you actually leave New Delhi, really.
yeah, yeah. I think it was an adventure. That's what it seemed like, and I really wanted to live in the States at that point in my life. And, I'd seen everything about the States, and obviously my sources were not entirely accurate. Hollywood had a lot to do with it, and TV shows had a lot to do
Ignorance
with
is
it.
bliss. I keep
I
saying
know,
it.
I
Ignorance is
know, I
bliss.
know. Yeah, and the internet was new, but I had an uncle who was working in the States. He was on the West Coast. This company was in Boston, and it felt like a thing that would be fun. And I always wanted to live away from home, and at that point in my life, get as far away from New Delhi as possible, for a variety of reasons that we won't get into. But but then the good thing was that they also hired three other people from the program who I knew, and it was an adventure for all of us. All four of us joined the startup, and we lived together, and
Yeah,
that was
okay.
totally fine. And it worked out. And then the startup promptly got first they had layoffs, and like about 3 months after I started at this company, they had layoffs,
Oh.
and we were like, oh my God! But then we didn't get laid off. No, the four of us didn't get laid off, so that was good. But then looking back, I think the layoffs were a sign that the company needed to change something, and they got acquired by a large public company shortly after.
What were you building there?
It
What
was
was
supply
the
chain software,
Okay.
logistics software, and and they got acquired by a larger supply chain software company. So, so
Okay.
this, yeah,
So and you were I'm guessing the stack was Java,
yeah, Enterprise
SQL,
Java. I was building Enterprise Java beans. I do
Java
not,
beans.
yes, yes, I do not regret leaving all that behind. I was very happy to not be building enterprise Java software.
Okay, if you could write a letter to yourself right now, to that person that just showed up in Boston the first day, and you can hand them a letter, what is it going to say?
Go join Google.
Don't stay here. Go to Google. Go to the West Coast.
Yeah, go to the West Coast, go join Google.
Okay, that's fair. So my guess is that's what you did next at some point.
No, I didn't. So I should have, but then this company was acquired by this large public company in or like mid-level public company in Atlanta. So then I moved to Atlanta to work in the headquarters,
I mean,
and
technically,
yeah,
you're kind of tethered because of the visa, right? It's not like
I was getting there. Yeah, so
it's
they
not
filed for
like you
my
have a
green
choices.
card. Exactly. So they filed for my green card, and and then the green card process takes many decades if you don't have a master's degree and you're from India, because there are quotas.
Oh,
And um and I was kind of just stuck there for most of my 20s, which in hindsight just set me back, my career back by about 10 years. Um, but but on the bright side, I met my wife in Atlanta. So, it was, and like that was the best decision I've ever made. And so it all worked out.
was she from New Delhi or is she from the States or?
No, she was from a different part of India,
Okay.
and she had moved to Atlanta for her first job out of college. She went to Auburn University for a master's degree, and she was the first person in her family to ever go to grad school and ever leave India. Um, and we met in Atlanta at this nonprofit that we were both volunteering at.
And did you both speak the same language?
Language? Yeah, great question. So yes, so we both spoke Hindi,
Okay,
which is sort of, the national language that most people in India, not most people, but for the most part, people know and understand. But then her family didn't actually speak Hindi. Her family spoke a different language, and so she and I were able to communicate. But
that's cool.
even today, like some folks in her family aren't able to communicate as well with my mom who only speaks Hindi.
Yeah, well, my wife is Colombian, so when I go over there, it's all
Okay,
Spanish. But I grew up in an Italian household where I wasn't taught Italian, so I've lived my entire life being in a room where I don't know the conversation that's going on, which I think works to my advantage. One, it's good here anyway because I can disconnect and not get in trouble. I
it's
don't know what
fair.
you guys are talking about anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I
But
don't,
even like,
yeah,
but when I go to Europe, I tell people all the time if you want to speak in German or whatever it is you speak, like I'm not offended. Like you're not insulting me by doing that. Like you're not being rude. I've lived my entire life like that. So some level, I think it's been an advantage. But yeah, that's why I was asking you because it's nice to be able to definitely speak to your partner, maybe that other language, and have a private conversation every once in a
yeah,
while.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it just these things are up to chance, and so many things have to come together to get to a point where you meet the right person, and now we're together and happier 17 years since the day we met, um, and then but shortly after we met, um, we moved to the Bay Area because
Okay.
that was something that we
You
wanted to do.
so you found another company in the Bay
No,
Area.
not yet. So I was still working for this company, but then we wanted to move to the Bay Area. And so I was working from home, and her company had another office in the Bay Area.
Oh, nice.
So that worked out.
So
But
what
then
year is that? This has got to be like
late
2004,
2000s.
late 2000,
Yeah, yeah, late
2008.
2000s. Yeah, around that time.
Because now we're
And
dealing with that mortgage crisis.
yes, we are dealing with the mortgage crisis. Yes, and it was an interesting time for both of us. And I was still at this company, and this company had gone through multiple rounds of layoffs as a public company, and I survived each round. And um,
Do you
but
think? Do you think? What do you think you survived? I'm curious. Do you think you survived because you made yourself indispensable? Do you think you survived because of salary? Because sometimes when
no,
they
I
cut,
was making more money than most people in the
yeah.
company, most
Oh,
engineers in the company at that point. There was a
yeah.
time when like my manager was like, "Dude, you're making more money than me." And I was like, I don't like that thing, you should negotiate better.
On while still needing a visa.
Yes.
I found that I have a lot of friends who I always got pissed off that they were kind of stuck and then treated sort of inappropriately from a salary perspective. So it's nice to hear that the companies eventually saw your worth and didn't want to lose you.
Yeah, I think that this company, even though it was not a company that I would necessarily say is like the top software company in the world, I do think that they did treat people fairly, and and even though they had to make these business decisions around layoffs, yeah, I think the people were being, I think folks in the company, even whether they were on a visa or not, were being paid, and were being paid fairly, and so I was making good money, but I also realized that I needed to get out of there if I needed to do something interesting and important.
So you were
And
bored? You were just bored with the work you were doing
I was
there,
bored.
or
I was
you
very
wanted
deeply
more?
bored.
Okay.
Um, and I mean, like writing enterprise Java for years. Like, what do you expect?
I know you did a lot of it. You did a lot of it.
Yeah, and so then I was like, look, I don't like this, and I'm just going to teach myself other things outside of this enterprise Java stuff because I want to build stuff that I enjoy building.
So what tech
And
did you choose? What was the
Python,
tech at the Python?
Python, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, Python, it still remains like if I had to go build something, I think Python would still be my language of choice.
Yeah,
Even though
we're
at
talking
Stripe,
what, 2009, 2008,
yeah,
2009,
yeah,
you
something
think?
around that. Yeah.
Okay.
And Django was on the scene, even though
Yeah.
Rails was on the scene around then. I just felt like I gelled better
C
with my
sharp. You
brain.
never thought about C sharp?
No, that was still
You
in the
weren't very
enterprise
well.
category. I was much more
Okay.
like, how do I build
You
apps
want
quickly?
to
And going
Erlang?
from
Erlang was around.
it was still, yeah, I know. I think Python just sort of fit the bill in terms of being able to build stuff quickly and also in a
Okay.
way that I enjoyed. And I think Guido did a great job uh, shepherding the language. And it was being adopted at Google. Facebook was still using PHP, and obviously there's the
Yeah.
whole Microsoft situation. But I ended up like learning Python from scratch pretty much, and starting to build apps of my own on the side. And then I got to a point where my green card process was advanced enough where I could switch jobs without restarting the process from scratch.
Nice. Okay.
And so I was
As
building
long
these
as that
apps
company would host you,
as long as the new company would
would host.
also continue the process.
Yes.
Yes, yes. And so I was building these applications on the side, and one of those applications needed payments and credit card payments. And I spoke to some folks at Braintree. They had a nice credit card API, and they were like, well, you need to be VC funded or making a lot more money than you do for us to like accept payments on
Waste.
your behalf.
Oh.
And
Wow.
I was like, this is high project. What am I going to do? But then I'd also seen this post by this unknown company called slash dev slash payments, who were in private beta in 2010. And I'd put in my name on a wait list. And I think I was like maybe one of the first people who they didn't know who got off the wait list and was able to integrate payments,
Nice.
and probably one of the first like 50 people to ever adopt Stripe as well, slash dev slash payments back then, as a payments API. And they would give payments to anyone who they didn't care about like they needed users and they didn't care about whether how much funding you had. They really cared about getting product adoption and feedback. Um, and this was also a big innovation at the time, where Stripe on the back end, um, the Carlson brothers did a lot of work to make sure that you didn't have to go fax a ton of your details to someone, which was how everyone got payments back into 2010. You didn't have to fax a page of your passport. You didn't have to give them all the information on your business. You could just sign up, get an API key, and integrate this API, which in 2010, I don't want to get into trouble. I don't want to get slash dev slash payments into trouble. But let's just say that PCI compliance was a bit,
No.
uh,
None of that
yeah,
stuff existed, dude.
back in
No.
2010, PCI compliance on the Stripe API was not entirely something that Stripe would endorse today or that I would endorse. But
Nobody had it.
it
I was doing payments in 2004 and 5 and it was the same. Everything you're describing, right?
Yeah, but then Stripe actually made that bit incredibly easy when they redid their API in early 2011 while still being in private beta. Uh, so they changed the API upon us and they introduced this notion of Stripe.js, which I think was a huge innovation at the time, which allowed you to accept payments without being on the hook. And then also you could just sign up and start accepting payments as long as you gave them specific details about your business. And there was no delay. You could just start using it right away. And the API that they introduced in I think it was like April or May of 2011 was very different from the API I started using back in 2010, and that made a huge difference. And I was one of the earliest Stripe users, and they changed the name in about I think March 2011 to Stripe from slash dev slash payments. That was a good decision, and I kept giving them a ton of feedback about the app and the API and how it wasn't great, and I wasn't getting the right information around my credit card declines. And so then I got to know the team a little bit. And in the summer of 2011, I'd known the team for a little bit. I'd been giving them a lot of feedback. I'd met them in their office in Palo Alto, and I was actually I was the first person to migrate away from Stripe, churn from Stripe as a user.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and but we still kept in touch. Um, and I think that throughout this, they'd raised a new round, and they were looking to bring people on, and so then Patrick, the founder and CEO, asked if I wanted to join, and I
And you
didn't
were
want to
like,
do
you're
it.
not pissed off at me because I left you guys for somebody better?
No, they were good about that. And again, I think that that is what differentiated Patrick and John the other people at the company. They really did care about customers and about the developer experience, as opposed to just being very like traditional business minded. I mean, they're very business minded, of course, but it was not like customers were adversaries, and even the people who left you were terrible. It was more like, how do we fix this problem? And how do we make a great product? And I think that that was fundamentally the focus on the product, was what made Stripe successful in the early days.
But they solicited you. That must have felt good that they
It
solicited
did,
you.
and I actually said no at the time,
Why?
because
You were enjoying
because
the work you were doing already?
I was, well, I wasn't enjoying the my full-time job, but I was doing these side projects, and so I thought that I would just like make the side project my full-time project at some point, and just go build it myself instead of like joining some other company.
Let me
And
interrupt you for a second.
yeah,
You're working 40 hours a week. How many extra hours a week are you putting into this? What is this
so you're
product
gonna
you're
get me into
building
trouble
anyway?
because you're assuming that I was working 40 hours a week in my day job.
Yes, let's assume you were working 40 hours a week. No, that's fair. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
You know,
No, but
I
I
know
was.
you. What you can do in an hour is like 3 hours of anybody else's time. Just
I
remember
don't.
that.
I don't think that's. I mean, I don't. No, I don't think
I'm
that's
trying to
true.
get you. I'm trying to get you to the math here, man. Work with me.
No, I was. But I was. Look, I was very motivated to change. Um, change my change what I was working on, and I was motivated to go build things that would make a difference, and and I was and I taught myself to do that, and I wanted to do that full time, and so that's why originally I said no.
You had to say
Um,
no because you would have lost all the time you had to build
I would
this thing
actually,
that you were
yeah,
building. It
right,
would have
right.
hurt you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Would have
because
cut into
like
it.
unlike my day job at this other company, and we're not going to name this company, but unlike my day job at this other company, at Stripe, I would have actually have worked hard because it was a startup. It
Yeah,
was like
yeah,
a 5-6 person company,
yeah.
and so
You
then I
can't
said no, but
you
then
can't tell me what this side project was that was taking payments.
it was actually a really bad idea, but my friend from college came to me. He was like, "Hey, let's do this," and I was bored out of my mind, and I was just like, "All right, let's do this." And he was like, "Can you code it?" And I was like, "Sure." And then I was building the whole thing, um, and it actually got mentioned. It got picked up by this publication called Twilist. It was like a stupid video game rental, crowdsourced video game rental situation, which was, I think, a really, really incredibly bad idea for the time because video games were going online, and there was
Um,
really no future
you
in
were
it.
late, but you learned a lot of tech.
Yes, I learned how to build things, how to get users, how to build the right product. And so in that sense, it helped. And that was how I eventually got introduced to Stripe. And that was again, it all worked out. Like Steve Jobs once said, you can connect the dots looking back, you can never connect them looking forward. And I think that was true.
So then I guess you realize that this thing you're building isn't going anywhere. So you go
Well,
back
that
and
was
you
one
say,
thing, but the primary motivator was actually my wife wanted to do a second master's, and um she ended up going to deciding to go to MIT for a master's in commercial real estate finance, and she was going to live on campus in Boston or Cambridge for over a
With or
year.
without you? I'm going to live there with or without you.
Well, so we decided collectively together, Bill, we decided that I would continue to live in the state in California because we don't want to move wholesale. We had, built up our life in California, and so then I just didn't want to work from home by myself.
What an interesting decision. She really wanted that bad, but she had to be there at the time the classes were in the
I mean,
classroom.
you have to. The program was really intense. I mean, it's a program at MIT, and you have to like live in the dorm or be on campus. You can't do it remotely.
That's wild to me that so God, I could talk for half an hour just on this decision right here. So it was decided that she would go to Boston and you would stay in California. And that was a 1 year or a 2 year program?
Um, so she finished it in a year because she wanted to come back home. But there are people who take longer.
Wow. Was that a tough year, or you were both so busy that um, it just went by? Like, I could trap. I love my
Yeah.
wife, and I'm not throwing Allie. I'm not throwing you under the bus. But if
No,
I
no,
go away for a week, I have to really make a conscious effort to stay in communication with her because that's what she needs, right? And that's fair. I mean,
yeah.
this is a year.
So what happened with us was we did decide that, it didn't make sense for me to just like move with her because then, and we wanted to maintain our life in California. And I just didn't want to work from home. And so suddenly, and I'd also like didn't want to actually look for a new job, but I had had this email sitting in my inbox from Patrick at Stripe, and he was like, "Hey, you join us," and I'd already told him no, and I was like, you know what? I changed my mind. Um, and so then that was the genesis of actually me ending up at Stripe in July of 2011. And so then the next year, yeah, we were both so incredibly busy um,
And
individually.
neither of you were feeling neglected because you were both so
Yeah,
incredibly busy,
exactly.
that you didn't feel that. Yeah, that's wow. I mean, you still have to maintain a relationship over a year,
Of
but
course.
wow, that's wild. And then she graduates and she comes back to California. And then what does she do now that she has this master's degree from
Oh,
MIT?
she worked for a uh, a commercial real estate investment firm,
Oh,
and
yeah,
if
okay,
yeah, if I remember correctly, back then they owned a bunch of hotels, some very large buildings in SF and LA. It was a family office, and they had a lot of money to invest in real estate.
nice. How long are you at? Two questions. How long are you at Stripe? Can you kind of go through a little bit of like all the different jobs that you had during sort of that time, how you progressed in the company?
Yeah, so I joined in July of 2011, and I left in uh, early 2016, and I did a lot of stuff because that's what you do in a startup, and you find my algorithm was just find the thing that the company needed the most that I was also able to do. That was how I spent my time at Stripe.
See, I'm kind
Um,
of confused because I didn't know when Stripe started. I it's my
Stripe
understanding that's
launched Stripe launched publicly in September of 2011.
so. My guess then is everything was originally built in Python and then moved to Go.
No, Stripe was Ruby from the start.
Ruby from the start, and then moved over to Go at some point.
I think they're still using Ruby. I haven't been there for a while, but there are parts of Stripe's infrastructure that are not using Ruby, that are using more performant languages because that's what they need.
So you had to learn Ruby. I looked at Ruby like for like 3 hours and said no. It wasn't my thing. But it's another sort of interpreted language. What were your thoughts on Ruby at the time?
I mean, the code base when I got there was in Ruby, and I just didn't think much about it. I just learned the language and, picked up programming Ruby or whatever the reference book was, finished it, and was like, all right, well, let's go build Ruby applications. I mean, it was less about the language and the technology and more about what are we building here? What are we trying to do? Who are we building for? And what do they need? Let's go focus on that. And
And
Ruby is
Ruby
just
was
a
great
tool.
for that, right? Because you could move
We were
fast
able
in
to
it.
move fast. Yeah, we were able to move fast.
But you can't scale Ruby really well without throwing a lot of money at it.
I think Stripe was able to do a really good job scaling it in ways that didn't require us to throw a ton of money at it. But I do think there were parts of so even back then, I think there were parts of our code base that weren't Ruby. Yeah. And I
So,
think they've done other stuff around Ruby to like try to make it perform better since then.
no, that's fair. So, what happens in 2016? Because you're there 5 years. This is the longest stint, oh, second longest, because in Atlanta, that company
Yeah,
that
it
we
was the other
covered,
one.
you
Yeah.
were there for a
So
while.
so I was there and then I think it got to a point where I just needed to go do something, find something, build something on my own.
Different. Oh, okay. I keep this theme keeps coming back that you really want to be an entrepreneur. You really want your own product. You really want to have control over this thing that you build. This keeps coming back, and then you keep getting sucked into somebody else's product. So now in 2016, the itch has you get an itch again. Okay, and
Yeah.
then what happens?
And Stripe was doing incredibly well. But at the same time, I think it was also a good time for me to leave because financially, Stripe had done well enough where I didn't have to go look for another job to pay the bills. And I could spend enough time on figuring out what I wanted to really do for the next decade. Because I think when you build a company, any company you build is hard. And in the best case, you'll be working for it for more than a decade. And I mean, obviously, other people might have different opinions on this, but this is how I think about companies. And so the goal for me was to find as ambitious of a problem as I could find, where I had a clear path to a solution and where I could wake up every day feeling excited about it for as long as possible. And go ahead.
So I was going to say, I feel like when you start a company, you have this mindset can change, but either you decide you want to start, I would call it a lifestyle company, where your goal is 10, 15, 20 years, or you're looking for the quick exit, 3, 4 years, get the exit, and let's do something else. And I've
Or,
always been on the lifestyle side of things too.
or you could build something that you can work on for the rest of your career. Um, and that is and is still incredibly insanely ambitious. And
Yeah.
you could
Well,
go
I
compete with
yeah.
AWS and go
No.
GCP.
Well, that's I'm impressed with anybody who wakes up in the morning and says, "Okay, we're gonna try to disrupt the." I tried one company that was trying to disrupt the established realtors. Got my ass kicked really, really quickly because I just didn't have enough funding. To be honest with you,
Mm.
it's really hard to be a disruptor and then have to teach people something new. It's really,
And to
really hard.
convince them that you're not crazy and that this thing will work. Yeah, I hear you. We've raised $157 million and I've gotten a lot of no's along the way. And that's okay. You have to be okay with being misunderstood, but at the same time, you need someone to support you. And so we've been really lucky, I'll say, to have found the folks that we found along the way who have supported us and invested in what we're trying to do.
But you have revenue. Like you've got some for anytime somebody wants to start a business, I say to them, your goal has to be that somebody gives you $1. It's maybe not in the first
Yes.
year, but at some point somebody has to be willing to give you $1 for what you're doing, and then you have to get to a point where you're break even, and you have to figure out where that is, right? So just to get somebody to give you $1 is like this monumental milestone, I think.
I think that's right. I remember the first time someone we didn't know paid us. That was a pretty great moment. Um,
It's an amazing
and
moment. Yeah.
it's an amazing moment, absolutely. But the other thing about the problem we're trying to solve is people are already paying money for it. They're just doing it in different ways. And so it was very clear that if we got the right product uh, that actually solved the problem that we're trying to solve, which is to get people started really easily, but also to help them scale, then people would be willing to pay a lot of money for this because, like you said, most people don't want to do ops. Like if you're an infrastructure company, then you go find the small number of people in the world who want to do ops and you hire them. But most companies are not infrastructure companies and they really want to focus on making money through selling the right product to their customers. And so that led to Render growing entirely through word of mouth. And it's actually grown entirely through word of mouth until now. We don't have a marketing team. I'm trying to hire, like now with this funding. If anyone's listening, I want to hire a VP of marketing and I want them to build out a marketing team, but we don't have one right now. And that's
Do
okay
you,
because
do you want a marketing team or do you want a sales team?
no, we want more people to know about Render and we want them to know how it's different. And we want to do it in a way that is efficient. And Render is still very much a product-led growth, self-serve company. And I believe in that because developers fundamentally don't want to talk to sales. As an engineer, I just want to get stuff done. I just want the platform to work. And I don't want to talk to someone who's trying to sell me something unless it's to get a discount on my large bill. And guess what? That's how AWS works. You can go build anything you want on AWS without having to talk to sales. And I think that's great. I think that the companies that try to insert sales in unnatural places in the journey, especially when they're selling to developers, are doing themselves a disservice. I think you want everything to be as self-serve as possible, and people are willing to pay a lot of money self-serve. And people don't, again, like what we've found is that people are willing to pay a lot of money for stuff that gets them what they need to do without having to talk to anyone. And so we also don't have, we have like one salesperson we hired last, like in October, but most of what they do is they need, there are people who do want to talk to someone. So let me maybe qualify that. There are certainly some people who need and want to talk to someone. They have questions and they, you know, for whatever reason, they find it more comfortable to talk to someone instead of going through the docs. Now, we would still prefer that they go through the docs. However, when they come in and ask to talk to someone, then you need someone for them to talk to. And I've been doing that, but now we have someone who can help us scale that.
Sounds to me like you want DevRel. You want
Yeah,
somebody on
yeah.
stage.
We need DevRel. Um, we need people who understand developers, who speak their language. We don't want like a traditional marketer who generates leads for sales. That's not who we are. And I think all marketing, especially in our space, marketing is education. Anything that is not helping developers, anything that is not educating them, is the wrong kind of marketing. And so that's what we need. When I say marketing is really helping people understand whether render is the right thing for them. Well, first of all, helping them become aware of what render is, and then helping them understand whether render is the right fit for them or not, and then helping them become successful on the platform.
I know a few people right now, I think, that are in that DevRel space that you should probably talk to if that's what you're
I would
looking
love to
for.
talk to them. Yeah, would love to get intros, referrals after this.
Yeah, I'm going to send you that. I do I essentially call myself a community engineer. I don't like the
Amazing.
DevRel sort of name, but I like thinking of myself as a community engineer. And when I'm on stage or I'm doing things, um, I'm trying to help the people that are listening to me, not sell my services, but try to teach them something with the hope
Exactly.
that when they need the help, they think about me first, right? And that's what
Yes.
works. If you're out there pitching when you're trying to help, people can smell it
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
far
look,
away.
I'm a developer. I hate that. I hate that, and I wouldn't want to do that for our customers.
Yeah, because what you need is somebody on stage saying, okay, I've just built this app. Let's containerize it. Let's deploy it. Hey, it needs to talk to another service. Let's deploy that.
Exactly.
Look,
Yeah.
it's talking to it. And sort of do
Yeah.
these live demos on stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
even build videos for our website, right? Like this is how it works. And I think most people find it incredibly easy to just do it themselves on render, which is why we've grown the way we have. But I do think there's an element of education that is um, hurting our growth, or we could be growing even faster if we had that, and bringing render to more people at the end of the day. Because it pains me to see people reach for Kubernetes and try to manage all that complexity when really something like render is much better suited to what they're trying to do.
Yeah. If I were to be that person in your company, the other thing I would want, and I would want these people to do, is talk to your existing clients. What are their pain points? Let me help you fix your pain points, because that's the material that you're bringing to stage
Yes.
outside of what you can share, right, proprietary. But like that's your stage material, like the pain
Yeah,
points that you get companies through.
that's a great point. Yeah. And we have people at the company, whether they're product managers or engineers or customer support engineers, who are constantly talking to our customers in ways that allow us to understand what they need and what we should focus on. And this is why, we haven't gone and bought 1,000 or 10,000 NVIDIA GPUs, because we know that that is not what our customers need today. They need something else.
I love, again, I'm back on your website. I love that you have some fixed monthly cost pricing. I hate pricing that's variable. I hate not knowing what I have to spend next month. I'd rather overpay a little bit than not know what's going on. Talk to me a little bit about pricing is the hardest thing to do on these sort of platforms. And the LLM companies I want to strangle with this token based pricing.
Yeah.
Talk a little about
Yeah.
pricing. Pricing is so hard.
Yeah. So one of the problems we're trying to solve is exactly that people run into AWS, which is like they can't understand their bill. There's again, when you have 300 services and you're trying to use all of them together and glue all of them together, and you have all these other line items. I mean, we get, obviously you can imagine we have very large bills and like actually very long bills from both AWS and GCP, and we understand very acutely the pain of trying to make sense of these things. Um, and if you've ever looked at an AWS bill, then you know the pain of trying to understand what EC2 other means. There's like a big line item on everyone's AWS bill that says EC2 other. And
Everything
well, good
else.
luck. EC2 other, everything else. And good luck trying to decipher that. Good luck trying to decipher that. There are entire companies that are making millions of dollars just trying to explain to people what their AWS bill is. And that is not the kind of world that anyone wants to live in. People want predictable pricing. They want to be able to understand why something costs what it does.
And they want
And
the freedom to use it, because when you don't have that flat rate pricing, you stop doing, you lose innovation.
yeah. And so for render, we have very clear, like, look, if you want this much compute, then this is the monthly flat fee. And I'll also add that I don't think our pricing is perfect by any means. And for every company, as you evolve, as you expand your customer base, you have to continue to think about how to evolve your pricing. And that's actually something that we're thinking about now. So one of the things that we've heard more recently is, look, render's bandwidth pricing is higher than it should be for some of our customers. And so while we have volume discounts for bandwidth, we think that we can bring bandwidth pricing down across the board. And so there's someone at the company whose job it is to go do that right now. And I'm excited about making that happen over the coming months.
So let me, from a ops perspective, I know just enough ops to be dangerous. I told you how much I hate ops.
You're not alone.
Is everything so? When I think about, I want to use this cloud platform. I want to be able to deploy the stuff that I'm doing. I don't think I necessarily mind a browser UI that lets me hook my GitHub in there to actions so I can build, contain. I'm assuming you have all that CI,
Yeah,
CD built in.
yeah. You can just give us a location. If you have a Docker file at the root of your repo or anywhere in your repo, once you connect GitHub, we'll automatically build the Docker file for you, and we'll spin up the container and we'll give it a URL. We'll give you an SSL cert. We'll make sure that it's always up. If your application stops responding, we'll automatically restart it. If you set up our auto scaling rules, we'll make sure that your CPU utilization or memory utilization stays at a specific target across all your instances. We make sure that it can connect to your render Postgres database over a private network. We make sure that it can do the same thing with other services, because every service in render gets an internal address, and we automatically detect all your ports. So you don't have to do any of that configuration. And you can just connect to other services on render, in your render account using that private address without ever going over the internet.
So
And we're actually, yeah.
if I have like 4 containers I want to deploy, I could deploy it to this account, and you'll run them. They'll be localized in some form or another. I can specify
They
that.
will all have their individual private addresses, and you'll just be able to use that to talk to each other.
I can assume they're fairly close to each other in
Yes,
terms
they
of
are.
hops.
Yeah.
And then I guess it's more money if I want to. I need to expose. I need a public IP address and anything like that.
Everything gets, so if it's a web service, it actually just gets a public URL and an IP address, and you don't have to set up any load balancers yourself. That's all taken care of. We even compress your responses using Brotli compression, which is, the most modern way to compress your responses. We take care of DDoS protection automatically.
So
We've
I don't need
integrated,
Cloudflare. I don't need
no,
Cloudflare.
we've integrated Cloudflare's DDoS protection into the platform.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
And that's free with everything. Like, it's included in the price.
Do you guys already have support for like auth? So I don't have to worry about installing my own maybe auth 0 service and
Oh,
tokens and stuff like
no,
that.
that's something that I think about a lot. We don't have that yet. And there's a lot of companies doing auth and doing it well. We haven't gotten to that point yet.
I hate rolling the auth stuff. I mean,
I hear you.
a give and take because I had a client that was using AWS's auth services, and we had to write our own quick auth service that mimicked it because we had to get off of AWS. So it's sort of a double-edged sword when you sort
When
of
you
do that.
offer auth into the platform. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you don't have to make it. I mean, so you should definitely offer as a platform services that most of your customers need. And that's our philosophy as we think about our product. Um, but that shouldn't prevent your customers from being able to use whatever it is that they want. And so one fundamental product philosophy for us is we meet customers where they are. So we don't dictate how they build their apps. And in that, I think we're very different from, say, um, a serverless provider who will tell you to use um, a serverless backend for everything. And we're saying, no, if you want to run containers, run containers. If you want to run cron jobs, run cron jobs. We'll probably introduce a serverless offering ourselves, but because some people want to run workloads that operate better under that programming model, but we're not forcing you to build your application a certain way. In fact, our goal is to support you any way you build your application, even if it is not built in the most perfect way possible. And that's something that we say internally, like there is no wrong way to build an application on render. We want to support you however you build it. If it's an incredibly inefficient application because you haven't optimized it, guess what? It's our job to make sure that we support you. We never tell you to improve your application. You do whatever you want, and we're here to support you in your business goals. Because at the end of the day, that's what render is. You want to focus on running your business, and our infrastructure is optimized for that.
And I think you said you have CLI tooling, so you can provision stuff outside of the UI.
Yeah. So the dashboard is great, but the CLI is also really great because we made it interactive in a way that most CLIs are not. So if you use our CLI, you can actually list services using an interactive terminal UI, and you don't have to go like list them in one command, then paste a service ID in another command and do something else. It's all really intuitive, and people seem to love that experience.
And I'm assuming the APIs that are being used by the two UIs are also available. Can I?
Yeah, so we have a public
Yeah.
REST API, and that's what the
Nice,
CLI
nice.
is built on. So you can really build your own whatever you want to do using our REST API.
That's amazing, dude. I honestly had not heard of Render before, and
This is why we need a marketing team, Bill.
I've been sharing this with like a whole bunch of people inside of Ardan Labs. I'm like, yeah, check this out, check this out.
Yeah, I would love to talk to folks if they have any questions, feedback at Arden Labs. I mean, this is what we love doing. This is what I love doing, talking to people and helping them solve their problems on render or elsewhere. And yeah, I would love to talk to your team to figure out if render does make sense, or if it doesn't, that's totally fine too.
Well, we're from an Ardan perspective, we're small. I mean, we're running a handful of services and websites and stuff. But for clients that are thinking about Kubernetes, at least for me, I know everybody, I sound like a fanboy. I'm a little bit of a fanboy because I hate ops here. I think for anybody that's thinking about Kubernetes, this might, I want to figure out, I'm going to ask Florin, he's one of my ops people. For anybody thinking about Kubernetes, is this an alternative? That's the management business question I have in my head. Florin, if I didn't want to run GKE, can we do it with this, right? Like see that I would love a stage demo on here's my cluster. This is all working over here. Let me show you how we can do the same thing here. And then you can really start to compare the
Yes,
differences, right? Like that to me
absolutely.
would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we need to do.
Yeah. We're just about out of time. It's been really amazing meeting you, man, and having this conversation. Your
Thank you. Likewise. This
story
is
was
a very
awesome.
different podcast from the ones I've done where, you're going to get me into trouble. I know that, but that's okay.
No, I think you're not in trouble with your wife, and that's all that really
No,
matters
certainly
at the
not.
end of the
No,
day.
no. Yeah, certainly not in trouble with my wife. That's not an issue.
All right.
I'm probably in trouble with like people at the company who are going to listen to this. Like, dude, why did you say this? And I'm like, oh, sorry.
No, I wanted to say kudos to everybody over there for building this and having the guts to even attempt it with. I think one of the things that makes me sad, and I'm wondering what happens at the end of this year with AI, is that you get a bunch of startups. My best example of it is with Lambda. There was a company back in 2011 or 12 called Iron.io. They were out of San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. I remember them.
Okay.
Yes.
I was
Yeah,
using
functions as a
this
service. Yeah.
functions as a service. They had built it because they needed it when they were a consultancy. And we were using it. It was the first time I ever really could leverage functions as a service. Their product was great. And then Amazon introduced it and Google introduced it. And the company just sort of had to fold because at that point, Fang sort of swallowed the marketplace. And that's an example of this happens all the time. And so there are more small AI companies today than I could ever remember, even when the internet boom sort of started.
Yes.
And they're all track stars right now.
Yes.
Like, if you're not a track star right now as a startup, If you're not working 70 hours, if everybody's not working 70 hours a week, you're not going to win this race. But I'm super interested to see at the end of the year how much of these companies, their products get swallowed up by FANG, or are they able to move so much that they're sprinting so fast that they stay. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball on this one.
It's hard to tell. It's really, I don't think anyone does. And the way we think about it is, again, if you focus on solving customer problems higher up in the stack, the higher up you go, when it comes to infrastructure, the higher up you go, the more insulated you are from AWS and GCP because they're not very good at building things further up the stack. They're very, very good at hardware and low-level software and building services that do one thing well, but then you still have to go glue everything together. And I think with AI, um, we're seeing more and more advances in ChatGPT, in Claude, where they're building agents into the application or trying a lot of different ways to make their core foundational models more useful. And that's exactly what you're saying. We'll see what happens. If every company that is trying to build on top of OpenAI's API is going to be subsumed by it. And we saw a little bit of this with back in the day, how all these companies became big on Facebook's API, but then got the rug pulled from under them after Facebook changed how they were doing their API. And I think that's always a risk.
But you're like the reverse. You're like, you're on the back end of that. It's like they've established themselves as these large infrastructure companies with scalability. And you're coming around the other side and trying to disrupt that and say, you don't need these, you don't need these big companies. We can give you the same thing, the same reliability, but give it to you at less cost and less complexity.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, you just don't have to hire a lot of ops people. You can, or you don't, your engineers don't have to go learn ops. And I think that's where the cost differential lies. And it's not just cost, it's also speed. And especially as you think about smaller teams being able to build more with the AI assisted coding, you'll see that smaller teams will be able to move faster. But if they continue to focus on building on Kubernetes, that's going to slow them down a lot more. Um, and that's where we're seeing more and more of these teams adopt render. And so our focus remains on solving the problem with an all-in-one experience that is focused explicitly on application engineers, not on sysadmins. And AWS and GCP built for DevOps. And
Hey, you're
that's not what
talking to
we're
me,
doing.
dude. You're talking to me, man. I hate us. You're talking to the right cat.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go,
Yeah.
man.
Again, building for application engineers. That's what we do. That's what we do well. And that's always going to be our differentiator.
All right. If anybody wants to reach out to you after listening, and we'll get it in the show notes as well, or they're even interested in that DevRel position. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you're going to be in DevRel, you're going to be on stage. You're not selling. You're sharing. You're helping. You're teaching. I got to say this all the time.
Exactly.
But if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to do it?
It's my first name, Anurag at render.com.
Nice. All right. Well, again, I really appreciate the time. This was a fun hour and a half. It was amazing. And again, say kudos to the team over there. I think it's awesome what they're building.
I will. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed the last hour and a half. It flew by. Thank you, Bill.
All right. This is the On Labs podcast signing off, and we hope to see everybody again real soon.